Welcome back to Orthodoxy Going Teach. Here today we are doing a specialized video which tries to deal with, or where we are trying to learn about the whole Orthodox jurisdiction in United States of America. This question came up recently in our mind when we read about Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America consecrating Albanian bishop, or for the Albanian community, Bishop Theophan, which made a bigger issue, and where we also saw some type of resistance and some type of commentary from the side of Albanian Church. So here with us, we have our chairman, Dr. John, with us to deal with this particular issue and to know more about this. We were not thinking about anyone else than him, because he is there in America and he's one of the most authentic person where we can learn about these things. So welcome to this special episode of Orthodoxy Going Tweets. So directly to the topic that we are trying to discuss today. So so about all these issues that was coming out from the side of Orthodox of Albania. So it makes me a question inside my mind. How many jurisdictions are there in United States of America, particularly under Greek Orthodox Archdiocese, which is directly in connection with the Ecumenical Patriarchate, is directly under Ecumenical Patriarchate, and which is ruled by Archbishop Eliphadophorus. So what was the whole issue? How the jurisdictions works in USA, and how's the whole thing? Like, I really believe that that's a mixture of each and every jurisdiction over there in this one particular geography, and we all like to hear from you what it's all about and how it is divided.
Well, it's wonderful to be with you, Don George, again. Well, the issue in America is we have so many jurisdictions. It's an anomalous situation, because technically within the Orthodox Christian faith tradition, the Eastern Orthodox churches and the Oriental Orthodox churches, there's only supposed to be one bishop in each city. But with these ethnic, historically over the last 300 years, where you have the ethnic groups settling in the new lands, as they're called, North America and South America, but in this case, North America that we're talking about, every ethnic group that was had an Eastern Orthodox tradition sent a bishop or bishops over. So it's not uncommon to have in one city, especially a major city, overlapping jurisdictions of bishops even physically present, residing there, whether it's Greek, whether it's Romanian, whether it's Russian, whether it's Syrian, Antiochian, whether it's Bulgarian, Serbian, Armenian, Coptic, Ethiopian, the Malankara. We've got, it's kind of a jurisdictional mess from an Orthodox ecclesiological perspective, and just a basic Christian ecclesiological perspective. So we have all of these. I mean, it depends how you count, because within certain groups there are schisms, as we know. So, I mean, we could have like 18 jurisdictions, or as many as 23 or 24. It depends how you count within North America. And so that situation has lingered and has not gotten resolved. If anything, it's become even more polarized.
I have a particular question when you gave this introduction. So we have heard about Orthodox Church in America. So as there is a church or autonomous or autocephalous, their autocephaly is contested. So I like to mention in that way only. So as they are over there, so we all will think that that's just one jurisdiction which concerns about whole Eastern Orthodox churches or Eastern Orthodox parishes in America. But it's really fascinated to see that all of these autonomous autocephalous churches have their own bishops and their own diocese over there. Even they have their own metropolis, their own archbishoprics, and different hierarchical positions are over there. So, first of all, I like to understand, like, uh, then what's the role of Orthodox Church of America in all of these things? Like, does it really cater all ethnic groups, or is it just some type of Unitarian American thoughts that's professed by Orthodox Church of America?
Well, originally when the OCA, the Orthodox Church in America, was granted its autocephaly in 1970 from the Moscow Patriarchate, the idea was that this was going to be a vehicle for all Orthodox to come together. And although certain strides at that time, with which was established by the late Archbishop Yakovos of the Greek Archdiocese of America, of North and South America at the time, and Metropolitan Philip Saliba of the Antiochian Archdiocese of North America, the idea was that, granted, they would not give up their jurisdictions to join the OCA, but they would create a collaborative called SCOBA, the Standing Canonical Conference of Orthodox Bishops in America, or of America. So this was a cooperative group. But the hope of the OCA was, the Orthodox Church in America, as a jurisdiction, on autocephalous jurisdiction, was that it was a place for all to come in. That didn't happen. And most of the OCA were of Slavic background. You had Russian, but mostly Carpatho-Russian. They were 2/3 of the jurisdiction at that time from 100 years ago came in from the Byzantine Catholic, previously known as the Greek Catholic, the Unia, from 500 years ago, that had retained Byzantine practices and whatnot, but came under the jurisdiction of Rome, the Roman Catholic Pope. And they left 100 years ago for a variety of different reasons under the leadership of a now canonized saint, or glorified Saint Alexis Toth of Wilkes-Barre, so who was a Byzantine Catholic priest. And that was your base. Now the OCA has totally changed in that 2/3 of the OCA, which, depending on the numbers that you have, you know, according to the Pew research group that did an actual study, regardless of people saying, well, there's millions of Orthodox in America, it's probably less than 1/2%, if that, in the United States, of 355 million people total populace. The OCA is comprised 2/3 primarily of converts from Protestantism and Roman Catholicism, and it's changed its complexion in that regard. But but there are probably about 33,000, according to the Pew research and the research of Alexei Kindrich, who, on behalf of what became SCOBA, rebranded to the Assembly of Orthodox Bishops, did a study for them in particular and presented a white paper to them of his study based on the surveys. And basically, the other jurisdictions, never joined the OCA. They were in communion with the OCA, but in the case of the Ecumenical Patriarchate, the Greek churches in America, they're not ostensibly officially recognized an autocephalous church. They're seen as a dependency, a daughter mission diocese of the Russian Patriarchate, because, as you allude to, that would create a canonical problem, in that when you have an autocephalous church, why do you have competing jurisdictions within them? But that has really remained unchanged. So the OCA and the Assembly of Orthodox Bishops are two different entities. One's a jurisdiction, the other one's a collaborative body of hierarchs. And as I said, even within the Greek Archdiocese, you have 3 or 4 subsets of jurisdictions that have dependence and have been received in the Ecumenical Patriarchate. One of them is the Carpatho-Russian Diocese, which was another emergence into the Eastern Orthodoxy from Byzantine Catholicism in the mid part of the 20th century. They were being led by the late Bishop John Martin, who was a Byzantine Catholic priest and then was received in Orthodoxy, and it brought in a whole cluster of Byzantine Catholic churches. Having said that, you have the Carpatho-Russian diocese, you have the Ukrainian diocese, and now you've had other vicariates being created within the Greek Archdiocese, and namely one of those is the Albanian diocese.
So by considering all these different jurisdictions, my next question is about recent news that was coming out from America that shows that it's a huge growth of Orthodox Christians in America. So what I really thought was, as you have mentioned, what I really thought was it was just because of immigration from towards US. What's your thoughts on that particular point? Is it just because of immigration, or do you really believe that still the Orthodox Church is getting a lot of converts or new Orthodox faithfuls from other Christian churches like that of Catholics or Protestants or new sectarian groups or all those things? Like, what's your idea? I mean, what's your thoughts on that particular note?
Well, I think there are about probably three different aspects to look at this. One is, no, I don't. I think the influx of immigrants, as far as from Greece to the United States, that's pretty much. I mean, that's pretty not relevant in that that's not much of an impact. It's not like it was in the previous century. Second of all, any growth that would be taking place, it would involve people coming into the church, particularly the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America and any of the parishes, usually converting to the Orthodox faith from other faith communities, other faith traditions, Christian faith traditions as a rule, or the unchurched. And I think there's a few reasons for that. And it's not that there's like a huge growth. It's just, it seems like a more of a population exchange. Because our numbers, in spite of what I'm saying, our numbers are the exact converse. We're actually had a 22% decline since 2006 of church membership. And that's pretty clear across the board and statistically. And yet, why is there kind of a bump, small be it relatively speaking, but yet a significant bump when everything's on the decline within the Greek Archdiocese? But you also find this within the Antiochian Archdiocese and to a certain extent into the OCA. But I think there's a few factors involved with this, numbers aside, because just the same numbers it talks about people worshiping in the OCA on a regular Sunday basis, 33,000 people are really engaged that are active. In the Greek Archdiocese, regardless of what the millions that are claimed nominal adherents, you're only based again on Alexei Kindrick's report, white paper to the Assembly of Bishops based on the Pew Research Institute of Religion survey statistics. In the OCA, or in the Greek Archdiocese, you're basically looking at 120,000 if people were actually engaged in worship. The Antiochians, probably about the same number, maybe a little bit more than the OCA. Or at least the same number, or just under the OCA's numbers. So we're not talking about a huge influx. Now, I will say this. There is the fastest growing group, and it's based on immigration for almost all of it, is within the Coptic Orthodox Church communities, because they're getting a big influx from the old country, from Egypt and from other areas that they're coming to the United States. And you see, that's by far and probably the most engaged in many ways, the Coptic piety of the people coming to the United States and founding churches, establishing churches, but local churches. And you see that with the proliferation of fact they've brought so many bishops over and ordained, consecrated so many bishops for the Coptic Church in North America. That aside, I think culturally we find a very interesting dynamic, and this isn't true within Eastern Orthodoxy or Oriental Orthodoxy. This is true within Roman Catholicism, Protestantism, and culture, society in general, which we've seen. We're just coming to realize the impact of cultural Christianity. And what do I mean by that? When I define that, it doesn't have to do with ethnicity. It doesn't have to do with denominationalism. It has to do with a mindset, a phronima, that's not rooted in the gospel. You see, so many times people say, well, I'm nominally, in name only, Greek Orthodox or Presbyterian or Anglican or whatever, or Roman Catholic, and it means absolutely nothing to them in the way they live and behave. And then there's also this disposition and this mindset in how they worship. When they come to church, are they really there to worship, or are they there for social reasons? And I think within the culture, what we've seen is the stigma of non-church affiliation is removed. For better or for worse, it's just a fact. You don't have to be socially acceptable in America anymore and have to belong to a church and say, well, I pay lip service to a church, whether you're engaged or not. And what you see is people, the Eastern Orthodox, the Orthodox Christians, just as much as any other person in America, has decided in many instances, why should I get up on a Sunday morning and worship a God that I'm not sure even exists? And so they become disenfranchised, disaffiliated, even though maybe not officially, they just not, or they become your secularists, just like any other group. And you see this in the institutional old mainline churches, not in the Eastern Orthodox, Oriental Orthodox, Roman Catholic, Anglican, Lutheran, Presbyterian, Methodist, even Southern Baptist. You're seeing this across the board. It's almost like a winnowing, that the Lord is letting this winnowing take place. And yet, the groups that are growing are your evangelicals. Now, the difference, our failure in the church has been we've ceased to impact the culture and society in any meaningful way. In fact, we've allowed ourselves and continue to allow ourselves collectively, I'm talking collectively, not individually, but collectively, to be impacted and influenced by the culture and society. So hence, cultural Christianity is not real, true Christianity at all. It's devoid of the gospel. Now, what you find in why somebody would come to Orthodoxy is in a society like this, especially young males, particularly, they're even not so young males, people are looking for some kind of established, ancient, beyond themselves tradition that says, here is a definite set of guideposts and a pathway to a meaningful life in Christ. Now, how that's always expressed, we can argue about the positives and the negatives about that. But the fact is that explains a lot of the phenomenon. People are looking for a tradition, even though Orthodoxy is not exact science, as you and I know. You can have 10 Orthodox in a room and get 11 interpretations of something. But with that, there's a thirst for something ancient, something established, something beyond themselves than just what my experience is. And I want to be part of that. I think in general, that encapsulates what's not just happening in North America, but in Europe and maybe across the world, but for sure in North America and Europe. If Europe's post-Christian, we're at least one under post-Christian than Europe. And I would think Canada is in the same boat as Europe. They're probably a little further down the road than we are in America, just because of America having even regardless of faith tradition background, America was founded as a Puritan place where people could have freedom of religion. It was based very Christian. Now later you have deists very much involved, but initially and the initial Americans, and that has not changed from the fabric, and that influences us even if we realize it or not, just by the fact that we're Americans. And anyway, I think that kind of summates and summarizes the situation across the board in America, in general with Christianity, and in particular what's going on in Orthodox Christianity.
The trend that you said about like people trying to reach back to the traditional roots, I really believe that that's happening in all throughout the world, because we have also seen some groups or individuals here, even in Malangara, or we have seen. We have examples from all the places, even in uh, even in nations that we used to say that they are more into secularism. They are coming back to they're trying to get back to the traditional roots and to the traditional church. So when they come back, uh, that may be from a Protestant or a sectarian group, but that type of developments, it's really happening throughout the world, and that's not a thing that we can neglect. And still that so this traditionalism and Puritan forms still matters. That's what we can understand. So when you were covering the previous question, you were also mentioning about Coptic Church. So here I just like to make a point about that, or what's happening related to Coptic Church in America is from what I am seeing and what I am experiencing. So recently we have seen at least three more bishops being consecrated for America, different dioceses. So now the whole structure of Coptic Church in America include general bishops, metropolitan bishops, auxiliaries, and there is a huge I don't sorry, not a huge, but there is a significant number of bishops and dioceses. That's really increasing uh, year by year. That's something that we can when we look to Coptic Church, that's something that we can understand. On the other side, in case of Eritrean and Ethiopian church, similarly we can see these type of what do you say for that, you may can name it as positive development, but on the other side, these much quantity or this much faithfuls are being decreased from their own original homeland. That's something that's happening. So in case of Eritrean and Ethiopian church, this type of migration or this type of their development in America started when they were facing severe issues inside the nation, particularly when it was political struggles related to communist governments in Ethiopia. So that was something that even there was a synod that was there in US. So that was the exile synod of Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which was there over a long, significant time. And even in case of Syrian Orthodox Church and even in case of Malangara and Armenia, we all know that we in this year, Armenian Eastern Diocese of America is celebrating their 100 years year of establishment, which is really celebrated in a large level where they are present primate is going to be consecrated as a bishop. He's a archdeacon. Archpriest who is going to be consecrated as a bishop as soon in October. In case of Syrian Orthodox Church, there are multiple jurisdictions, including that of Indian Syrian Orthodox Christians who are over there, and also uh, another group which is known as Knanaya, which they see that they are having roots from Iraq, then they migrated to India, and they still keep that Puritan thoughts about their blood purity, which they keep through their marriages, like in-group marriages. That particular group is also having significant number of churches there in America. And recently, in case of Malangarajas, I recently heard that they are having some plans to create a diocese in Canada because of great number of migration of youths from Malangara or from India to Canada for their education purposes and other things. So in one way or another, going through a phase where all churches are able to find their uh, growth in American diocese, but that's also some type of decline of their churches in their original places. when we I really believe that there is some other confusions related to jurisdictions too. So I really like to know about what's the difference between jurisdiction of ROCOR, Russian Orthodox Church outside Russia, and that of Russian Orthodox Church, and that of OCA, which claims that they are also part of Slavic tradition. So, what's the equilibrium between ROCOR and or direct metropolitans from the Russian Orthodox Church, and how it goes? Like, what's your idea about that?
Well, the Moscow Patriarchate, when the Bolshevik Revolution took place in 1917, 1918, what was the biggest problem? There were people that were part of Tsarist Russia after the royal family was arrested and then ultimately executed, martyred. They fled to Paris and to other places in Western Europe. Now, they were all of Russian Orthodox heritage, and the Parisian school came under the Ecumenical Patriarchate. And that's where you have individuals such as Father George Forovsky, Father John Meyendorff, Father Alexander Schmemann, in that tradition. Also, within those emigres, you have also Paul Evdokimov, Father Paul Evdokimov, and many other Russian emigres with that. And having said that, when it came time to, in this country, affiliate or disaffiliate from that Russian Orthodox mission, you ended up seeing the situation that people that could not accept what was going on in Russia at that time, with Patriarch Sergius having basically, being forced to, or ostensibly, or collapsing to the Bolshevik influence, and saying that all these churches were basically an extension of Moscow Patriarchate. Well, you ended up having the Russian Synod, the Russian Church abroad, or which later would become ROCOR, known as ROCOR, Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, saying we're not in favor of what's going on in Russia, so we're going to split off from the Moscow Patriarchate. Now, this was totally separate from the Metropolia, which was the previous name of what would become the autocephalous church known as the Orthodox Church in America. And ROCOR would not accept any kind of collusion and maintain very traditionalist mindset to have anything to do with the Moscow Patriarchate. And this schism existed for 7 decades, up until 2007, when ROCOR and the Moscow Patriarchate reconciled, and they had a reunion where they were back in communion again. And that's even with all of the history with Patriarch Pimen 70 years ago, or not Patriarch Pimen, Patriarch Sergius, Patriarch Tikhon being martyred, suffering for the faith. And they put all that aside, and they had a reunion. Now, what ended up happening then, ROCOR became in good stead with the rest of canonical orthodoxy, because before they were an outlier, and they were only in communion with certain other schismatic, mostly Greek old calendarist groups, because that was one of the issues too, was the old calendar, the Julian calendar, adherence to that, whereas the Greek Church of Greece and the Ecumenical Patriarchate and the majority of other Orthodox churches had switched to the Gregorian calendar. But ostensibly, the thing that even complexified the whole situation, and during all of this time, ROCOR was in communion still with the mother church of the Patriarchate of Jerusalem. So it was and the Patriarchate of Serbia, for that matter. Those two they remained in communion with, and it was almost like a blind eye was turned by the other churches, saying, well, we're not in communion with ROCOR, but we're in communion with the Patriarchate, the mother church, the Patriarchate of Jerusalem, and the Patriarchate of Serbia. So in Orthodoxy, the reality is it's not an exact science. Whether it should be or shouldn't be, in God's providence, it's not. So there was this confusion within confusion that went on for several decades until 2007, when the restoration took place, reunion took place. And we could talk about the variety of reasons for that reunion, but it happened. Now, let's fast forward to, in recent years, in the last 4 or 5 years, there's been the schism has reoccurred in certain circles. Now, again, it hasn't been complete because the OCA doesn't recognize the schism per se. The Antiochians don't recognize the schism, but ROCOR, who still maintained, part of the agreement was it maintained its own jurisdiction, but under the Moscow Patriarchate. So you have parallel jurisdictions with Moscow Patriarchal churches in America and in Western Europe and the rest of the world where the ROCOR exists. They really stopped being known as the Russian Synod or the Russian Church Abroad. Now it's really ROCOR, but it's the same body, just rebranded, if you will. And the situation is that ROCOR is not in communion, and neither is the Moscow Patriarchate, with the Patriarchate of Constantinople. And anybody that agrees with vocally with the Constantinople, per se, Patriarchate of Alexandria or the Church of Greece or whatnot, but it's, again, murky lines, but definitely Ecumenical Patriarchate. And that was over this whole, what happened in Ukraine with the Patriarchate receiving the hierarch there that was deposed, defrocked by the Moscow Patriarchate, who was a member of the Moscow Patriarchate at one point in Ukraine. And they received, the Ecumenical Patriarchate received him and his successor, and they established a jurisdiction there within the confines of Ukraine, the Kiev, that ancient see of Kiev, ancient in the sense dating from over 1,000 years ago. So needless to say, we're back into a state of schism if you're from the Greek perspective, the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople, with what is ROCOR and now the Moscow Patriarchate.
Yeah, now the questions of canonicity and questions of the schism has really increased after the creation of Orthodox Church of Ukraine and um, their autocephaly, and we are also witnessing some similar things in case of Macedonia recently, where ecumenical patriarchate and Russia also and Serbia was in two sides than being in one side. So these type of jurisdictional questions are still happening all around the world. That's something that we can understand, and that's one takeaway from all these things that we discussed. And we really believe that we have covered a majority of all these jurisdictions. We don't really ignore the significance of Georgian Church in America, Macedonian Church, which have recently reunited with the Orthodox churches. So Macedonian Church is having its own jurisdiction over there. Serbian Church is having multiple metropolitans and multiple bishops in America. And in case of Romanian Church, they have autonomous dioceses over there. And in case of all the canonical churches, even whether it is Orthodox or Oriental Orthodox churches, whether it is Eastern Orthodox churches, we can see that a lot of each and every church is interested to cater their diaspora there in USA, and that's something that's positive in one sense, and which makes all these diaspora to be with the Orthodox Church and to be in their faith and to worship in their own language that they used to worship. And it's really a great thing to cover this particular question. And we, in the beginning, we said that what was the what made us to this particular question. And we are really thankful for Dr. John to be here as a resource person, and we really believe that we will really we have to um, take these type of questions in future too, like related to jurisdiction, related to schisms, and so on. So we really believe that these special episodes in OCP related to all these things will be continued. And for now, we are signing off, and see you soon with another episode.